Good morning, everyone. My name is Zhara Ronizi. I'm a 16-year-old analog astronaut and student researcher with the hopes to perform medical research on the Martian surface. And today, I will be exploring the possibilities of conducting surgeries on Mars. I will be looking at why it is important, why we need it, what factors from space influence our bodies, and looking at possible solutions to make surgical performances on Mars possible. So over the last decades, it has been evident that humankind is motivated to go to Mars. Space agencies across the world like NASA, ESA, and the Canadian Space Agency, as well as private space companies like SpaceX, have been developing technologies to send not only robots, but humans to Mars. And it is evident that humans are not supposed to flourish in space. Humans thrive under the cradle of Earth. We are protected by Earth's atmosphere, shielded by the extreme concentrations of radiation from those extreme temperatures. We are held down to Earth by its gravitational pull. And going in space has been seen to have drastic effects on the human body. And because of this, we need to develop preventative treatments as well as possible after treatments in case surgeries arise during missions or if the human body continues to deteriorate and we're not able to protect it from the space environment. And so in order for humankind to be able to live on planets like Mars, to be able to live on colonies on the moon and become a spacefaring civilization, space surgeries will be extremely important in this step. And being able to advance in space medicine and being able to develop some capabilities in performing surgeries in space will be the key to becoming a spacefaring civilization. Now, there are two types of consequences from going to Mars that will require us to have the capabilities to perform surgeries. Number one, it's the natural course of events that take upon the human body just from being in space. And number two, it's the additional consequences from going on such a treacherous trip like that of going to Mars. And so when we examine the natural effects of being in space for prolonged periods of time, a lot of times we look at astronaut Scott Kelly's one-year trip in space, where scientists and researchers were able to learn a tremendous amount of information about what happens to the human body after being in space for prolonged periods of time, like a year. Now, the first thoughts when we go to space is of being in weightlessness, right? So in sci-fi movies and also in the videos that we look of the International Space Station, being in weightlessness seems like such a fun activity, just floating around in space, and it is. But it does carry a load of consequences on the human body. For example, when you're in weightlessness, when you're on the International Space Station, it's not required for you to move as much as if you were on Earth. For example, if you want to get around the different modules on the ISS, you don't have to walk around or take the stairs. Astronauts say that they just kind of kick themselves around. They might pull and grab onto some handles on the ISS and kind of move around like that. So it does not require much movement. It doesn't require much spinal support, muscle support, movement of the bones. And this leads to problems like the loss of bone density. Thank you. Now, researchers at NASA, like Dr. Thomas Lane, have been performing this 4-year experiment called the subregional bone assessment, where they've been assessing the bone densities of astronauts that have lived on the ISS over the past 4 years and examining how much bone loss they've had. And it's predicted that on average, astronauts lose around 11% of their bone density across their mission. And back in the Mir space station, several decades ago, it was also analyzed that their cosmonauts lost between 1% to 2% of their bone density each month. So this has had a drastic effect on astronauts when they come back to Earth, especially when they come back into Earth's gravitational pull after being in microgravity for so long. Next, we also see muscular atrophy, otherwise known as the loss of muscle mass. And this is also because they are not moving as much. They don't need to, climb things. They don't have to walk around. They don't use so many areas of their body, so many muscle groups. So this leads to the loss of muscle mass, sometimes up to 20% of muscle mass over the course of their mission. And when they come back to Earth, as you can see in this previous photo, astronauts have to be oftentimes carried by the crew that's waiting for them downstairs, because once they get down and re-enter Earth's atmosphere, because the effect of Earth's gravity once they come back is just so different from what they experience, and their bodies aren't able to withstand that for the first couple of hours or even the first couple of days. Now, some other effects. Being in space, being in microgravity reduces the flow of blood across the body. And this means that less oxygen is also carried throughout the body. And this leads to takes longer time for injuries to heal, for blood clots to form, to stop the flow of blood. And so this is seen to be extremely dangerous, especially if we go to Mars and we get these injuries where, astronauts are losing a significant amount of blood. It will take a longer time for them to recover and heal. And this is also seen with eyesight as well. Less blood is flowing through the brain, it's flowing through the body, less oxygen is being carried, and therefore astronauts have reported to have a more blurrier vision as they go to space. So all of these problems are just some of the very broad, very diverse effects of being in space for prolonged periods of time. So these are the natural consequences that come from being in space. And so some of the solutions that NASA has come up with, that all the space agencies have been working on to protect their astronauts from these problems, has been pretty simple, nothing too extensive. For example, requiring their astronauts to exercise for at least 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, and every week that they're on the ISS. So they have treadmills, they have systems that help them with strengthening their muscles, and they also, a lot of times, they prescribe astronauts to take biphosphonate medication, which is also used in osteoporosis patients amongst the elderly to help them with the joint pain, with early onset of arthritis. So astronauts have been taking medication, and of course they have to exercise in space they can't completely eradicate these effects on the body, but they can slow it down a little bit and make it less extensive. Now, going to Mars itself has a very diverse set of consequences as well, beyond just the natural effects like bone density, muscle mass, eyesight. So it is estimated that every 2.4 years on a mission to Mars, some sort of medical emergency will arise that requires medical surgery, emergency surgery on the human body. Now imagine this, we're traveling through space for 6 to 8 months just to get to Mars. Imagine all those high concentrations of radiation, the possibility to be hit by space debris as we leave Earth orbit. All of these possibilities will offer a big, significant danger and hazard to be injured throughout the journey. Now, we've been pretty lucky over the past decades that we've been in space. We haven't had these completely, extremely dangerous, medical emergencies. We've seen some astronauts have some cold. We've seen astronauts develop blood clots, but nothing that requires emergency surgery. So we've been lucky, but if we go to Mars, we should be expecting some emergency surgeries. So of course, going to Mars carries this whole baggage, right? All the natural effects. But if astronauts decide to pull a whole Mark Watney story, they might get hit by space debris on Mars, they might be caught in a dust storm, they might get injured. Of course, if they're working with dangerous equipment, they might injure themselves, and this will all require some sort of treatment, and often it will require surgery. So what are the treatments that we have for these kinds of problems, like being injured on Mars, being cut open. Nothing. So that's why we need surgery, space surgery. We need to develop our capabilities to be able to conduct surgeries on Mars and even in space in general, just in microgravity, to be able to protect our astronauts and treat them after they have been injured. So again, being in microgravity offers this barrier to be able to perform surgeries, right? If we're trying to operate on someone in microgravity, we can expect all their organs and all the blood to flow around, right? To flow all across. Not only will that be probably endgame for the astronauts, but that will also make, if it's even possible to perform surgeries, it will make it a lot less efficient because there's going to be so much stuff traveling across, and whoever's performing the surgery will probably be impaired by all of these objects. And now once we do develop the capabilities to perform surgeries on Mars, we're going to need to get all these instruments to space. So we need to carry the surgical instruments, right? We need to carry the sutures that are necessary. We need to carry all these different technologies. And we also have to carry the astronauts that will perform the surgeries. And as we all know, it costs thousands of dollars to send the smallest things into space. So sending all of this equipment, plus our astronauts, plus the extra payload, will be extremely inefficient and not feasible. As we see, it's a bad idea. So a solution that I have been working on, some research that I've been doing over the past couple of years, is to work on 3D printing. So we're already working on 3D printing in space, 3D printing modules. We've been having these ideas to 3D print tools, other different things in space. So what if we 3D printed surgical instruments? So that once we go to space, once we go to Mars, we might carry the metal portions of these instruments, like the forceps, the blades maybe, the scissors, but all the other parts, like the handles that are made out of plastic usually, we can 3D print them once we're in space. So we'd be saving thousands of dollars in money and saving extra room to carry other essential payload with us to Mars. And so we'd be going from these metal instruments to these 3D printed instruments. And so that would save us so much money and so much time. Now this is the research that I've been working on. So over the past couple of years, I've been performing simple interrupted sutures on a suture pad, just like this one, and just practicing. And once I have finished just recording myself, how much time it takes on average to perform a simple interrupted suture across a line, after that, I'm going to take it to a microgravity environment, like scuba diving. So essentially, I'm taking my suture kit with me and performing those same exact procedures, the same interrupted suture underwater to test how different is it between performing it on Earth gravity and in microgravity, like in the ocean. So how much time does it take? Also an observational study of how efficient was it? Was my mind still focused as I would be on Earth? So these simple studies would help us figure out if 3D printing these instruments is a good idea or if we should stick to just carrying the whole baggage to space. And so being able to 3D print these instruments and to use them to perform surgeries on Mars would help us with a whirlwind of activities once we're on Mars. For example, what if someone's leg is dismembered on Mars, God forbid, and they need emergency surgery to reattach the leg, to stop the bleeding? Having the ability to perform surgeries would help us perform these operations. Or if astronauts develop brain tumors from those extreme levels of radiation again, and they need emergency surgery or else they will die, we will have the abilities to perform brain surgery, to perform extensive surgeries that will help save these astronauts' lives. And the possibility of seeing the first baby born on Mars. Now, if we want to become a spacefaring civilization and we want to establish permanent colonies on the Martian surface, on the lunar surface, wherever we explore, we must be able to perform live births, and we're going to need to be able to perform surgeries on the mother after she has given birth, before she has given birth, to make sure this is possible. So learning to conduct space surgeries will open so much possibilities for us to focus on the mission itself once we go to Mars, rather than worrying so much about the astronaut safety, because we know that we are prepared, we have the countermeasures, and we have the preparative measures in case something happens. Now, being able to perform surgeries, again, it will make us a spacefaring civilization. We're going to be able to make colonies on Mars, right? Whether that's on the surface, whether it's in caves, or orbiting the moon, or orbiting the Mars. We're going to need to protect our astronauts. We're going to need to have the ability to do these preventative measures, to do these counteractive measures against these injuries. And we're going to need to essentially just focus and drill down on our space medicine capabilities before we even think about sending our astronauts out into these extreme environments. We'll even be able to go into interstellar space because we have our astronauts protected. We have all the equipment that's needed, all the equipment that's necessary. And so space travel, time travel, going and forming colonies on other celestial bodies will be possible, and it will be our primary goal. And so again, this leads to my conclusion, my belief that advancing space medicine and being able to develop these space surgeries and the capability to perform surgeries, to perform surgical procedures will be a key to developing a spacefaring civilization. Thank you.